A very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for coming to the MBRAS talk, the Malaysian branch of the Royal Aesthetic Society talk. We are very honored today to have with us two very distinguished scholars who will be sharing their research on various parts of the Malaysian scene, art scene, as well as the research on the Chinese community in Malacca. So the society was founded in 1877, and we published the first journal in 1878. And so it is one of the oldest learned societies in the region. So after that, you get to see other learned societies like science societies and other groups coming up. So this is one, the talk series is one of the activities, mainstay activities of the society. So we are very happy today to bring to you the talk. And the talk has been ever since the COVID-19. I think we have improved on our attendance because the fact that we are now running things hybrid. So today we are very happy to bring to you two professors, Professor Margaret Sarkissian and also Professor Jerry Dandelion, sorry. And we are passing through, and we very quickly caught them. And so today we have a group of colleagues, friends, who are here in the room in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and also many of you are out there online. So we welcome you, and today's sessions will be chat because there are two talks. So we would break them into two halves. The first half will be by Margaret, and this will be chaired by Dr. Florence Quek from the Chinese Studies Department. And then after that, Jerry's part will be chaired by Dr. Tan Miao Ying from the History Department. So without further much ado, I think that shall we, I don't know whether you want to have it after each talk to have the Q&A immediately. Maybe we will control it that way. So maybe a talk of about half an hour, then after that Q&A for 15 minutes or so. Then after that, we move on to the second one. Would that be okay? Yeah, thank you so much.
Around that, yeah. Good afternoon. This feels like a musical chair. Whoever need to speak to be here. It's arranged like a round table in the sense that we have our participants from online and here physically. And a very good afternoon to Prof. Danny, MBRAS members, and our invited speakers, Margaret Sarkissian and Jerry Dandelion. And I would like to introduce you to Professor Margaret Sarkissian, who is the professor and chair of the music department, Smith College, all the way from Smith College, and the president of the Society for Asian Music. Her research focuses primarily on the music and dance of Portuguese and Baba-Nyonya communities of Melaka, my hometown, where she has done extensive field studies since 1990s. So 30 years already. Yeah, 30 over. And her publications include year 2000, the Abuke's Children, Performing Tradition in Malaysia's Portuguese Settlement, 1998, Kantiga di Padri's Chang, and many articles ranging from music, brass, instrument, gender, and nasyid in Malaysia, truly ethnomusicology, right? Okay, her recent work, 2019, is entitled Living Ethnomusicology, Paths and Practices, that she co-authored with Ted Solís, the first published ethnography of the discipline. And today, we invite Prof. Margaret to speak on discussion of methods and sources for a book on Horace, Sta Maria and his work. Over to Prof.
Thank you very much. Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you for Prof. Danny and Prof. Paul, if he's around somewhere, for online. Hey, Paul. For the kind invitation to speak to MBRAS. It's very thrilling. And also to Prof. David Nyo for hosting us. He's been a wonderful host. We've been up at UITM this morning. And I'd like to also say hello to everybody here. I can't really see more than about 3 or 4 people in the Zoom sphere, but I see a few names that I recognize. So hi and welcome, I suppose. So this is brand new research for me. And it's been a project that I've been working on for quite a few years in one way or another. So I'm sort of excited to share it with everybody. And it's very much work in progress. So I'm hoping that there will be conversation and suggestions and feedback. So it's very much emergent. It's a little challenging to not be really looking people in the eye, because my first question was going to be how many people in the room or out there in cyberspace have actually ever heard of Horace Santa Maria. So could I, maybe if you, a show of hands or a thumbs up or something. I can't really see if, okay, well, at least Prof. Anis has heard of Horace Santa Maria. And I think Audrey and Lawrence, if they're the Audrey and Lawrence, I know probably have as well. How many people have heard of the Tres Amigos? Is there more people who've heard of the Tres Amigos? Okay, so we've got a few more people who know the Tres Amigos. So I would imagine that if there are some MBRAS members out there who are of a certain age, a little older, they probably do know the Tres Amigos, because it's people who grew up in the 50s and 60s would almost certainly know his music or their music. And there are some people online today who know him personally. So I'm very happy that you are here. Now, Horus, Master Horus, as he was, everybody called him, because he was a school teacher as well as a musician. He was famous enough in Malacca that the Star reported his death on August 31st, 2015. And I'm just going to quote a little bit of it because it gives a nice introduction. So the Star newspaper heading is Melaka. Horace Santa Maria, the founder, lead singer, and principal composer of the Tres Amigos, passed away in Perth on August 20th. He was 94. To pre-Merdeka-born folk, the singing trio comprised, the singing trio were household names. The original trio of Horace, Ernest, and Andrew competed in the inaugural 1950 Radio Malaya Talent Time contest and bagged top honors, plus an invitation by the then famed regional American music producer Kingsley Morando, who was based in Singapore, to record 8 songs. Subsequently, there was no looking back for this group. Notable accomplishments include an invitation to the Yang di Pertuan Agung's Istana grounds on Merdeka night to perform on stage following a grand banquet for the heads and leaders of the Commonwealth nations. Okay, so if I just press this, okay. So the Tres Amigos were significant in Malaya's post-war popular music scene. Now, this, what you see on the screen now, is the most famous incarnation of the group. And you see from left to right, Ernest Rodriguez, Camilo Gomez, and Horace Santa Maria. He's sitting on the right. This is really actually the second incarnation, because Camilo replaced Andrew Carvalho, who was one of the original singers. So as HMV artists and Radio Malaya stars, they shared the stage with people like P. Ramlee, Saloma, Gopal Shetty, and Ahmad Daud, and they recorded with Alfonso and Tony Soliano. So they were sort of up there playing with all the big names of the day. I've got a little bit of video here. I hope the sound isn't going to boom out. And I just want this looks like it will be relatively clear, but this is just a little bit of an introduction to the group. This is a film from 1954 that was made by the Malayan Film Unit, and it was a documentary about the group. Okay, here's just a little clip from it.
We present the Tres Amigos, Malaya's top singing team. These three friends from Melaka have made an international reputation for their close harmony singing of Malayan songs. All of Portuguese descent, the Tres Amigos have been friends since their school days. They are Horace Sta Maria, leader and founder of the trio, Ernest Rodriguez, and Camilo Gomez. Singing is only a spare time job for all three.
Okay, so it was a spare time job for all of them. And the documentary goes on to say what the others did. Camilo was a school teacher. Ernie Rodriguez worked for the customs department, and Horace, this is the little section on Horus, is the next clip I have for you.
We present the Tres Amigos, Malaya's top singing team.
Here we go.
The singer. And Horace Sta Maria himself, school teacher, arranger of all the songs, and family man.
Notice that little boy.
One for my master and one for my man for the naughty boy who cried.
Horace is keen to preserve the traditional Portuguese songs of Melaka before they're forgotten. And whenever he can, he writes down the tunes as they're remembered by older members of the Portuguese settlement.
Tem máximo duas cantigas. Espera um pouco. Eu escrevi mais antes.
One of these traditional tunes has already been recorded. And
Okay. All right. So get a little bit of a feel for Horace. And what was interesting was he was really actually doing sort of ethnography or ethnomusicology, even though he wouldn't have known what that term was. He was working with the older people. That old gentleman was Uncle Fanny, who was very well known for knowing a lot of Mata Kantiga or verses that would be used in song duels. So he was a very, very interesting person. I first met Horace, actually, the anniversary will be tomorrow. I met him on July 15th, 1991. And I interviewed him back then, really not knowing anything much about the Tres Amigos, but I was interviewing him in conjunction with my dissertation research, which was on the music and dance of the Portuguese community. I was very interested in how the music came to be, and there was a sort of very important performance in 1952 when a Portuguese minister visited Melaka, and they performed some music and dance for him. They learned some Portuguese dances from a book, and Horace was one of the musicians. He played his guitar and he sang a song in the local Portuguese for that minister. This first meeting, he was already by that time had migrated to Perth. He migrated in 1974, but he would come back to Melaka frequently, two or three times a year. He would always try to be there for the Festa San Pedro, but he would also come back for scouting jubilees and various scouting events, because he was very involved in the Boy Scouts. And he would also come back for school events at the school that he taught at for many years, St. Francis Institution in Melaka. So he came back a lot. So we got into, it led to a long friendship, and I got very used to, in about March, I would receive one of those old blue aerograms from him from Perth saying, I'm going to be in Malacca on these and these dates, so please make sure you you arrange your travel so that you're there, so that we can talk and we can chat. So it turned into many conversations over about a quarter century. And the more I listened to Horace's stories, the more I realized the way in which his life transcends the purely personal. So as an ethnomusicologist, I'm of course very interested in the light he sheds on music, on the early radio era and the recording era, the recording industry of the 1950s and 60s. But his life also provides valuable insight into so many other topics: the existence and nature of a Portuguese community in Malacca, what was going on in Malaya or Malaysia during his lifetime, how those events affected him, what was going on, you know, how they affected him, how they affected his community, how they got through the war years, independence, and so much more. Now, Horace's stories were always suffused with really rich detail that illuminate both his world and that of Malacca's Portuguese community through this rather tumultuous time. One thing that always struck me was that he was a very consistent storyteller. So, you know, he remembered things well, and he, you know, his stories didn't change every time he told them. So although he's no longer with us, I started this project when he was still with us, but I'm a little slow at getting projects moving. So this project probably started about 10 years ago. And although he's no longer with us, what's now kind of in our family become known as the Horace Project has become a really rather rich collaborative partnership in which a number of us have pooled resources. So I've got, you know, almost 25 years of my own field recordings with Horace. But there's also a lot of other interviews that were conducted by some local Malacca historians. And I think Audrey Lim is one of them. I think she's on this Zoom. So Audrey did a wonderful interview with him, really focusing on the war years. And then, no, she was still focusing more on his general life. Colin Go did a very wonderful interview on the war years. And I don't know if he's here or not today. But we pooled these resources. And then his family also started doing a lot of family history recordings. So they did video and audio recordings asking Horace about his family, his parents, grandparents, all sorts of topics. And most of these were led by his oldest son, Oliver, who I think was the little boy in that video. When I said, notice that little boy, well, he's now my age, or a little, probably a bit older actually. But he did some interviews, and as did his cousins, Steve Sequeira and Desmond Sequeira, who are sons of one of his sisters. So they all did these family history things, audio and video recordings. And then I had the opportunity to go to Perth in 2017 and got to know the entire family, extended family, and also have had the chance to do interviews with his then 2 surviving siblings, Arthur, his younger brother, who was 10 years younger, Arthur Sta Maria, and his sister, who's now the late Auntie Daisy Sequeira, who was really just, she was also a fabulous cook. So we really enjoyed our time in Malacca. And then Steve and Desmond and Oliver have continued to follow up with conversations with Arthur and with Daisy when she was still with us. So there's an awful lot of material that we have all gathered. We put it together and shared that resource. So it really is truly a partnership in terms of research, which is something that is really nice. It's not just working on your own, it's working with other people. So really this sort of steering group in this is now myself with Oliver and Steve. We just met in Malacca last week to sort of talk about the draft where we were at. And what we're imagining is that this is going to be a book that will be primarily a memoir of sorts, and really in Horace's voice, because the one thing I was able to do during the pandemic was actually transcribe a lot of those interviews. So I've got the material that is in his voice, and it'll have an introduction that contextualizes the times and locations, which I'll write, and I think we're intending that Oliver will write a family preface. As I've gotten deeper into the transcribing and organizing of the material, we discovered that a lot of detective work needed to be done just to weave the tale effectively. And this means triangulating Horace's stories, his different versions, which are relatively consistent, as I said, but often there's like one little detail that appears when he told the story 1 year, and then 10 years later he expanded on that detail. So there's a little bit of triangulating there, but also adding in Arthur and Daisy's memories, which are very important too, because you get the bigger family picture from them. There's also been a need to corroborate dates and facts, which I've been doing by using newspaper archives and other published sources. Sometimes he was a little vague about the dates when things happened. So, what an event was, but you didn't quite know exactly what the year was, how old he was at the time. So there's been a lot of that. And then the biggest challenge to writing this is figuring out a way to signpost and scaffold the text most effectively for readers who don't know Horace, readers who may not be interested in the Tres Amigos and want to know, well, why should we be interested in reading this man's life story? So trying to figure that out has been perhaps the biggest challenge. So what I was doing, what I was hoping, I had, until I sat down, I had no idea how long I was going to be asked to talk for. So what I did was I chose some of my favorite Horace stories for you. And I have I have a list of topics of some of these favorite stories, and each of these is in Horace's word gives us a glimpse into a particular moment in Horace's life and times, and I have what he said about any of these topics, and each of these encapsulate the bigger things. So it can illuminate, we can use stories of individuals, ordinary individuals, to illuminate broader cultural patterns and specific historical moments. So since I was asked to talk for 30 minutes and there's 12 minutes left, I clearly am not going to do all 12 of them, and that's an awful lot of pages anyway. So this is the interactive bit. So somebody brave can choose a topic, and then I'll read the story in Horace's word, and then we can just think about what we learn from this. So if anybody wants to pick a topic, either somebody on the Zoomosphere or somebody here in the room, pick a topic about what you would like to hear about of these.
Either the 10 or 11.
Okay. Okay. All right. So how about 11? And then okay, Lawrence says number 1. Okay. Thanks, Lawrence. How about I do, since Florence shouted first, I'll do the 11 and quickly, and then if we have time, we'll do the Eurasian Community. Okay. So, all right. So all right. So it's 2 signature songs, very, very famous songs. I need to escape. Oops, I didn't mean to escape that much. Let's do that. Okay, so according to Snap is okay, I'm just going to play it just in case there's somebody in the room who's never heard this song before. I'll just play a little bit of it.
I tell you it's true, kalau kau beli suka hatiku. Goreng.
Okay, I'm just going to stop it there because time is short. Now, this was a song that people still sing today. I took Horace to a sing-along at the Baba-Nyonya senior citizens, and everybody knew him there. And this was the first song they wanted to hear. But this actually has a very, very sad backstory that he didn't. And so I'm just going to read what he told. Before the war, there was a Baba boy from Huron Street. He was born deformed and brain damaged, so he walked with a very bad limp and could hardly talk. But he had a beautiful voice, and so his mother made him sell goreng pisang. He was bare-bodied, penniless, barefooted, and had to carry a big basket of fried bananas and fried yams. I think there would have been about 50 or 60 fried bananas in the basket. He would start from Huron Street and would walk from there to the clock tower, passing the government offices, the old Melaka Club, then Bandahile English School, and SFI. When he reached Melaka Club, you could hear his voice call out, goreng pisang, goreng kledek. People would ask him, berapa, how much? He could only say, 5 sen, 5 cents. He couldn't count. So you'd take what you liked, we would buy 3 or 4, and then put money in a cigarette tin in his basket. He was quite popular with people from our school. He would pass by at playtime or lunchtime. The teachers might hear him, go to the front of the school and buy from him. For about a month or two after the Japanese came in, the boy didn't appear because of the turmoil. When things settled a bit, his mother made him sell goreng pisang again. The rest house and the high school were occupied by Japanese garrisons, Japanese soldiers. In front of the rest house, there was an entrance gate and an exit gate so cars could go around. Mind you, in those days, all the cars disappeared, so we either rode bicycles or took trishaws. There was a sentry box there with 2 sentries, big men with rifles and fixed bayonets. Anyone who passed by in front of them had to bow before them. If you're in a trishaw, you've got to dismount and bow. If you're cycling, dismount and bow. If you didn't, you might get the butt of the sentry's rifle or his boot, or you got to kneel down in the sun for a few hours. This poor boy, he was retarded, so he didn't understand. He was going on his own merry way, singing goreng pisang as he passed the sentry. The sentry shouted at him, and when the boy didn't respond, hit him with the butt of his rifle. The poor boy fell. He tried to get up, but he couldn't. His bananas all scattered. He was kicked around and beaten up. There was blood everywhere. I ran into SFI for safety because I didn't want to see. The next day, his head was on the end of a pole in the center of the roundabout at the big junction near St. Francis Church, Bungaraya and the bridge. And there, on a cardboard in Japanese and English was written, "This is what happens to you if you disrespect a Japanese soldier." That troubled me for a very long time. Even now, when I pass the Equatorial Hotel, I still picture the Japanese sentry and that poor boy. Every time I eat fried banana or goreng pisang, I think of the boy. So eventually I wrote the song, goreng pisang, fried banana. Here, take this one, ini masih panas. It was a big hit. It was top of the charts for I don't know how many months. So that was the story about the song that has become something that is, very, very well known. There's a similar story for Samba blachan. I could go and talk about the...
Yeah, actually, there's a request from the floor to extend 15 minutes more.
Okay, so shall we do Samba blachan? Okay. All right. Then we'll get to Lawrence's request. Okay. All right. Now, this one I couldn't find. This is a bit of a cheesy version of it. I'm sorry, but it was the best I could find for this one. Okay, here we go. Samba blachan.
It's hot, but it's delicious. Sambal belacan bawa lekat. Marilah mari makan nasi. Waktu
Segiri masakan, tak hasil rasa sambal blachan, sambal blachan, sangat pedas. It's hot, but it's delicious. Sambal blachan bawa lekas, daging ayam.
Okay, I'll just pause that there. I'm sure that many of you remember this song. Okay, so here's his story about Sambal blachan. After some years, in 1955 or 56, before Merdeka, we were invited to Radio Malay Penang to record 6 half-an-hour programs with 8 songs to a program, 48 in all. We were offered $120 per program, $720 for the series. Of course, we had to share the money and then hire a car and stay in a hotel, so we didn't get much. We just went for the fun of it. While we were in the studio, after we'd recorded 1 or 2 programs, a young Malay fella by the name of Ahmad Daud came in and introduced himself to us. He had won first prize in Penang's Talent Time competition a few weeks earlier, singing the song Down by the Riverside. He invited us to his house for dinner that night and said he would come and fetch us. So after our program, we went to the hotel, had our shower and changed, and he came and picked us up. His house was in a kampung, a typical Malay hut with a veranda in front. All his relatives and friends from the kampung came. It was quite a memorable evening. The food was arranged on a low table on the front veranda. There was rendang, kuah asam, and on a flat plate, some sambal blachan arranged in such a way that you could see the letters T-A for Tres Amigos with 3 small cut limes. When we went up there, we had to take our shoes off, and he introduced us to his grandparents and parents and the whole kampung. Then he introduced the food. This is rendang, this is biryani, this is, that is, and look, this is sambal blachan. Now, you do the opening ceremony for the dinner. Each one of us had to squeeze 1 lime onto the sambal blachan 3 times. We enjoyed a good meal. At the end of it, Ahmad Daud took his guitar and sang Down by the Riverside. Then he gave the guitar to us and asked us to sing. So we sang our Moon is Shining Bright in Malay and English, and our Alabanda in Malay, English, and Portuguese. The kampung people were all very surprised that we 3, 2 Eurasians and a Goanese, could sing our songs in Malay. 3 non-Malays singing Malay songs. When everything was over, we were driving back from Penang on a hot afternoon like this. We stopped at a bridge over a river. The water was quite cool and inviting, so we went down and washed our faces and all that. Camilo and Ernie began to recount the sambal blachan incident, and they said, Horace, you better do something about this. What? Well, you wrote Goreng Pisang, so you better write a song about sambal blachan. It took me 2 months to finish the song Sambal blachan. When we first broadcasted it, it was a hit. We recorded it, and it was also a hit. But when Merdeka came in 1957, a few Malay fanatics said that our Bahasa Campur is spoiling the language. Somebody wrote to the papers and condemned the Tres Amigos for polluting our language. So Radio Malaya withdrew it and didn't broadcast the song anymore for years. And then about 10 years ago, I produced some CDs that included Sambal blachan. Radio Malaya played it, and everyone enjoyed it and didn't say anything about the language. There were so many requests that the CDs were very soon worn out and can't be played now. Okay. So from these 2 songs, we learned some really interesting little nuggets about life, about history. Tres Amigos were the first group to actually record using Portuguese or local Portuguese, what we now call Cristão, and they recorded their songs in Malay and English, sort of trilingual. Oops, that was my thing. Okay, that was okay. I'm not going to put it on again. Oh, okay, I'll start again. All right, and in fact, this was intentional, because after they won that very first talent time and they had their shows on Radio Malaya Melaka, they were very popular, and Radio Malaya Melaka, all the broadcasts at the time were live. So people kept calling into the radio show requesting their songs, but there were no recordings. So Radio Malaya Melaka got them to suggested go down to Singapore, because all the recording was done in Singapore, and make some recordings. When they went down the first time, they were told, you know, sorry, we're not going to record in English. I mean, you know, you're great, but you know, you don't compare to Bing Crosby, people like that. So if you will sing in vernacular language, come back and we'll record you. So they went back to Malacca, scratched their heads, and then started to translate some of their songs into Malay. The very first one was "The Moon is Shining Bright over Malaya." Came back, sang it in Malay and English, and on the other side they had a song called "Oh Maria," which was a song that is also known as Alabanda Istibanda in local Portuguese, which was a trilingual song. So that was their first recording, and the very first recording in Malaya that used all three of those languages. Okay, so we learn a lot of those kinds of little details. So going back to my list, Lawrence had wanted to hear about the Eurasians. Oh, that page has nothing on it. And I've now got all my pages complete. Okay, here, this one. I forgot to number the pages, which really didn't help anything. Okay, this is, all right. So you were talking about the Eurasian community. Now his account here is again really interesting, because I want you to listen and think about what he's saying, because he's really putting his finger on class divisions within the Eurasian community, but also between different communities, residential patterns, the job opportunities, the ways people socialize, all of that is embedded in his story. So here goes. This is Horace again. When I was a boy, there were two types of people who were Eurasian in Malacca. The first were those descended from the Portuguese and the Dutch, and the second were those whose skin was fairer and were the offspring of English estate managers or businessmen who had wives in England, but girlfriends or wives here and produced children. Sometimes when the Englishmen went back home, the children were given to the convent with a big sum of money for the convent to take care of them. When these children grew up, they were second-class citizens. During the British period, the Eurasians were more privileged than us for jobs and other things. Those who were of English extract were supposed to be higher class than those of Portuguese extract. They had English, not Portuguese names, and didn't speak Portuguese at all. We, the sons of fishermen, were third-class citizens. The others looked down on us. They always classified us as fishermen. An expression that was used for the well-to-do was upper tens, the upper 10% of the Eurasians. Before the war, most of them had white-collar jobs and lived in Tranqueira or Kubu, which still has a Portuguese street. They didn't want to learn Portuguese because they considered themselves higher class. Even the word Portuguese then was originally used in a derogatory way. It was a dirty word. You see on films sometimes, the Portuguese is a rogue, a pirate. They considered it, well, a bit low to admit they were Portuguese, until the visit of the Portuguese minister in 1952, when they put themselves forward and started Portuguese dance. Before that, anything Portuguese was an insult and low. It was meant for the coolies, for the laborers. These upper tens followed British, not Portuguese customs. They joined clubs, did all the high-class things like the British. Even so, they were still considered second-class Europeans. There was very little socializing between us and the upper tens. In church, we were in the same choir and attended practice together at St. Peter's Church, but after practice, they all went off home. I never visited their homes. Even the pews in the church were separate. They paid rent and had certain pews reserved for them. They would come late to church, all dressed up, and parade up to their seats. The church might be crowded, but we couldn't sit in their pews. We had to stand elsewhere. Most of the Portuguese had no education. Why? Because they were too poor. They were fishermen, and their grandparents were fishermen. Their great-grandparents were fishermen, and that's it. But those who were wise enough to send their children to school, like what my parents did for me, big progress. We became teachers or clerks or something like that. But the most education that we could get was secondary education, not more than that. No universities, no colleges in those days. They were only meant for the whites. Go to England for it. Nothing here. So that was his account of being Eurasian. I'm going to go back to my list in case we have a little bit more time. Anyone wants to pick another topic? Here we go. There we go. I done that. I did that one, the Eurasian Community. That was Lawrence's request. Has anybody got another one that they want to do? Can I make it bigger? Oh, no, that didn't work. I just made it smaller. Oops. Here we go. Does anyone online want to pick one? Is anyone monitoring anyone online? Okay, from, oh, Silvio. Hi, Silvio. May I hear number 2, please? I feel like a DJ or something. This is really good. Okay. Establishing the Portuguese settlement. This is a short one, but it's very, very interesting. Here we have a first-hand account of the location and the Portuguese settlement, the development. Okay, this is Horace's words. I remember the Portuguese settlement when it was still an atap swamp. It was so muddy. And as a schoolboy, I used to go there during the holidays with my brothers and a couple of friends to trap birds. We were interested in the mataputi, small birds with white rings around their eyes. Sometimes we'd cut the buah atap fruits. We'd eat the fruits, trap the birds, and then bring them home. Sometimes we kept the birds. Sometimes we sold them. It was good money, especially if the birds were good whistlers. We could get up to $5 per bird. $5 was a big amount in those days. In the late 1920s, 2 priests, Father Francois from the French church and Father Coroado from the Portuguese church, became friendly with the resident commissioner of Melaka and got the swamp land drained and reclaimed. They cleared all the atap and put laterite, red soil everywhere. Then they put in drains and built 2 or 3 model houses on Terceira Road. I think the first houses were built between 1931 and 1933. Now, this is a little later picture. It's from probably the late 1940s, but this does give you a good picture of what those original houses look like. A few more than he said at the very beginning. Sorry, this is me talking, not Horace. But it gives you a sense of what he was talking about. Back to Horace. Then they put in the drains and built 2 or 3 model houses on Terceira Road. I think the first houses were built between 1931 and 1933. I went there to pick some buah atap. So I looked at the new houses and told my mother about them. We were staying at Prior Lane at the time. The model houses were very simple, roof, 4 walls, kitchen, and the floor not even cemented. They were painted black wood oil, which made them quite dark and gloomy. And I just want to show you, this is in, oh, let me finish this sentence first. Tenants paid $1 a month, and if they stayed for 10 years, it would be their property. This is a picture taken in 2019 of the last traditional style house in the kampung. And so you can see here what he's talking about, that the houses were painted with black wood oil. This house is not lived in. It's basically just for show, to show people what the houses were like. But that's it would have been very similar in shape, only the roof would have been atap instead of the corrugated zinc. And instead of grass, there would have been sand around the house. Another little gem from this is that he said at that time, if he got a bird that whistled well, he could sell it for $5, but that rent was $1 a month. So you get a sense there. I mean, I have no idea what those would be in terms of today's values, but certainly comparatively, a bird that was worth 5 months rent in this house, which was very interesting. So yeah, that was his story about the beginning of the Portuguese settlement. Okay, number 6. So we're going to get to bingo pretty soon at this rate. Okay, number 6. Okay, the Japanese occupation. All right. Okay. When the Japanese reached Malacca, and this was January 1942, we were living in Prior Lane near the junction behind Master Farley's house. That night, when the Japanese came, they came on their bicycles. We heard them coming in. We went into our homes, locked the doors, and kept quiet. We heard them giving orders and all that. At the end of Prior Lane, there was a shop, and the shopman was known as Mwachi. During the night, it so happened that he panicked when the Japanese knocked at his door, and he got bayoneted, killed. On our side, we just kept quiet. Next morning, when I got up and walked out of Prior Lane to the Chinese temple, I was shocked to see, sleeping on the road, all those Japanese soldiers, the bicycles all down there. I thought they were dead, but they were so exhausted, they were sleeping on the road in front of the temple. When they got up, they raided the houses of chickens or whatever they could take. If their own bicycles got punctured, they just confiscated somebody else's bicycle, any bicycle they saw. I carried on working for the railway in Melaka. Around 1943 or 44, when the Japanese were short of metal, iron especially, they tore up the line from Malacca to Tampin and used it for the death railway in Thailand. So there were no more trains from Malacca to Tampin. The Japanese transferred me from Malacca to Tampin. So once again, I had to cycle back home along the railway tracks. After 1 or 2 months, I was transferred from Tampin to Kulai in Johor. There were only 2 people at Kulai, the station master, who was Ceylonese, and an assistant, me. When I arrived, my quarters were not yet vacated. So since I was a bachelor, the station master put me into the coolie quarters. I didn't mind, as long as I had a roof over my head. It would only be a matter of a few days till my quarters were ready. So I took my bag and put it in there. That night, the station master was on duty when the communists attacked the station. I dived under the wooden bunk in the coolie quarters while the bullets were flying all over the place. When the firing was over, I came out and saw the station in a shambles. They had broken the safe and took all the money, broken the Morse code signaling equipment, and abducted the station master. To this day, we don't know what happened to him. I rang Sinai, the next station, where there was a classmate by the name of John Brown, upper tens. He said, "Horace, if I were you, I'd run away. You'll have to answer to the Japanese because the first night you're there, this thing happened and nothing happened to you." He told me that there was a goods train about to pass going north to Kuala Lumpur. He would ask the Indian driver to slow down and leave one of the empty goods wagons open. So when the train slowed down at the Kulai signal lights, I jumped aboard with my bicycle and closed the door until Tampin. When the train slowed down at the Tampin signals, I jumped out and walked back to Malacca and then to Banda Hilir. So that's his story of the arrival of the Japanese. And that story was very interesting because at that point, he had had a little bit of a sojourn, a teaching. He started teaching at the age of 17, actually, in Muar. But because the war started, the opportunities for teacher training were discontinued. So he went and started working for the railway just before the war, which is why he was still with the railway and the Japanese just employed the same railway people. So that's how he got into working for the railway. And that's why, even though he was in the volunteer force, he was not sent to Singapore as all the other volunteers were, because he was considered essential personnel because he worked for the railway. So that was his railway story. But the story about that night when the Japanese arrived, there's an even more a sort of powerful story from Arthur, who was his younger brother. Now, Arthur was born in 1932, so 10 years after Horace. So he was about 9 or 10 at that point, probably 9. He probably hadn't turned 10. But he remembers going out that next morning and walking down the road in Prior Lane towards Assumption Chapel and seeing that dead shopkeeper on the floor. And he's saying that was the first dead body he'd ever seen, but it was also probably the first dead person in Malacca, the first person killed there during the war.
Okay. But the time as a moderator, I have to control it a little bit. Shall we open for one question? Two questions for Prof. Margaret. Either from the floor or from online. Anyone from the floor? Okay, Prof. Anis.
Thank you very much, Margaret. This is interesting when you have the vignettes and these wonderful, very personal narratives that you have
put together. The making of this text is interesting because you are the one who selected.
Yes.
Yeah. So my question is, as a person who is now reflecting, you said Horace's voice in the text. How did you go about embodying Horace throughout?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because you know whenever a text like this, you know, we read a lot of these kinds of texts, it looks like it's so much that person, but it's always the selection of the person who's putting it together. So there is an invisible hand at work. Now, the stage that I'm at the moment is I've gone through almost all of the interview material, all you know, just hours and hours, and what I did was basically I have got everything in the draft of the book at this point, and so it's not that I chose or didn't choose. I have all of the words. The choices were trying to group the stories into some kind of narrative that made sense, because of course when he's telling stories, he's just telling one here, one there. And so I've got the manuscript at this point in two large sections. One is Horace's world, and that's looking at the much bigger picture, what Melaka was like, what festivals, and you know, the cabarets, and the, you know, everything about that. And the second part is Horace's life, and that starts with him describing his grandparents and growing up as a child, and then going through to the Tres Amigos and that, so more related to his biographical world. And so I've got these two big sections at the moment. So I haven't made any, but I have, in terms of ordering, but you know, I have the thing that's probably way too long, and now I'm at the point where I have to make those decisions. How do we decide what stories are important and what to leave in and leave out? And I'm kind of struggling with that, to be honest, because you know, I'm sort of attached to all of it, and I'd love it to be all of it in there. But I probably will need to be a bit more selective. And you know, I'm hoping that I'm at a point now where I can have one or two people read the whole thing and sort of give me some feedback as to, you know, what might work as a book that is interesting for other people to read. It's all interesting for me to read. I love it, you know. So I'm at that moment. One thing that has been also interesting is that because I've been working with his son very closely, Oliver, when I sent you know, I've been sending, you know, cumulative big drafts of the manuscript that's getting bigger and bigger as I've been adding more material to it. And one thing that Oliver said was, it sounds like my dad. When I read this, I hear his voice. And for me, that's really, that is perhaps the most meaningful part of the enterprise. I mean, you know that my previous book was a set of interviews, and actually Prof. Anis is one of the people who was interviewed. And I really got a great satisfaction when either people in the book or relatives of the people in the book said, that sounds like my voice or my mother's voice. And I really, and for them, it's really meaningful because it gives something of that person. So I've been trying to keep that voice. Of course, this is another issue. I can hear Horace because I talk to him and I've listened to the recordings. Of course, Oliver can hear his voice, and Stevie can hear his voice, and anybody who knows him can. What none of us can never really do is get into the heads of somebody who's never heard Horace, and you know, how they process the language and process, because when I hear, I'm a musician, so I hear the phrasing. I hear the phrasing, you know, I hear he's got some just wonderful expressions. And I hear those, but even when I read them with the phrasing. But of course, to be a reader who is coming to this never knowing Horace, I don't know how I can tap into that. Yeah. So that's a really great question, and a question I'm thinking a lot about.
Thanks for the question and answering on the veneers, the sources, and how you treat it, like by ordering it. And would you like to comment a little bit on the methods of
Okay, so the methods has been really, sort of working with a lot of the things that I do as an ethnographer. So, I'm starting with conversations, which is what we as ethnomusicologists do. We interview, we talk to people. So that has always been my starting point, that this is ethnographic work. But then I've been really trying to verify facts, verify dates of things. And so I've been doing, fortunately, I'm married to a historian, so that kind of helps because, he sort of keeps me on the straight and narrow there. But he also introduced me to this brilliant, the National Library of Singapore's digitized newspapers and how to find things there. So, really looking for, for example, one small detail, Horace said that when he was schooling, he kind of got ahead of himself. So he and one of his older brothers got their junior Cambridge at the same time, but he didn't remember the year. So, I was going through all the senior Cambridge results until I found the right year that it had both those boys' names. So, those kinds of methods. And then I was personally very fascinated by the recording industry in Singapore at that moment. And when he's describing going to the studio to record, I didn't really know anything about that, but there's a lot of very interesting books about the recording industry in Singapore. So got hold of that. And then I got into contact with a record a specialist in Brisbane, a gentleman called Ross Laird, who's just published a book very recently about the recording industry in Singapore from 1903 to, I think, 1985. It's From Kronchong to Shinyao is the subtitle. And Ross was just absolutely wonderful. His book wasn't out yet, but, he answered my questions now saying, how did the recording work? How did the session musicians work? And, and so I learned a lot about what you can tell from looking at the label on the disc and so he really helped me understand those sorts of things. So there are certain things that sort of need a bit of specialized knowledge. And so, we do what we do as scholars, which is we, find those sources and look them up. So.
Thank you for hearing the voice from an ethnographer. Lawrence, okay. Right. Did he mention? Okay, but I saw Liz raise her hand before, earlier about.
Yeah,
would
no,
you
I
like to?
Was actually, it was partly in response. Hi, Margaret.
Hi.
Your question about, your response to the query about the selection and what do you do and how. And I was just thinking, you'd mentioned bingo, but I was actually thinking of teka-teki, because that's really what you did. You said here are 11 pieces. And so the order in which we hear it also tells a story and makes up the whole. So actually turning it into a performance piece, because I come from that side of the world, or that side of culture, would be something that would be, I think, extremely interesting as well. The combination of things. It doesn't answer your question, but it's just a response to how else you can approach it, or how else is material presented, because
that
interaction.
So that's really interesting. To turn it into a performance piece. I once saw an ethnomusicologist called Paul Berliner, a very well-known ethnomusicologist, who did a performance piece based on the life story of people that he knew from South Africa. But he did it kind of as a one-man show. And so he was telling like reading, but acting as if he was the storyteller. And I found it very interesting and very compelling. At the same time, this was probably maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And it was just at that moment when there was a real, in the United States, there was this real backlash against, who has the right to speak for who. And so he got a lot of flack for doing that, trying to put on a South African accent that was not his to tell the story. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think of that as a possibility, and maybe with one of his sons, rather than me doing that. But what I did today was I was just racking my brains for how can I, pull something together, and the idea of just picking sort of 12 things that seemed interesting to me, some of my favorite stories. This idea came to me at 2:30 this morning when I was really getting desperate, and I knew I needed to figure out something. And it was one of those ideas that seemed kind of good at 2:30 in the morning. But I think it's worked because, I've got these things, and then people can just choose. And so we've actually been dotted around chronologically, whereas my sort of overly perhaps anal desire to be orderly, if I had done that, I would have been, we wouldn't have juxtaposed things in the random way that we did today. And I thought that was kind of cool.
I think we really need to move on to Prof. Jerry, but would you take Lawrence?
Oh, yeah. Okay, Lawrence. Horace used to be the church choir master in St. Peter. Yes. Did he mention anything, say, on the types of hymns and challenges from singing in Latin and then to English hymns with the change with Vatican II? Master Horace did not, but Uncle Arthur has a lot to say about that. So Arthur was much more involved in that. So you and I can talk in a week or two about that, and I can share that with you later. But yes, Arthur talked about it, but not Horace. But then again, I never asked Horace about it. So he might have had a lot to say, and that's the problem of him not being with us. But thanks for the question, Lawrence.
Thank you so much.